Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening, friends, and welcome back to your Sunday Sanctuary for Screams. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, alongside my partner in crime, Malcolm Blackwood, and tonight we take a step into sacred ground. But don't expect salvation. These stories aren't about peace. They're about devotion turned deadly and what happens when the faithful fall farther than anyone else.
That's right. Whether it's the church, the family, or just your own twisted sense of righteousness, tonight's tales ask the same question. How far will someone go for what they believe?
All 5 stories tonight come from the mind of Jack Finn, a rising voice in horror fiction whose work cuts deep into the flesh of fear, guilt, and spiritual decay.
Faith, ritual, blood, and betrayal. The altar is set, and the hymns are unholy.
Now, before we start tonight's ritual, a little offering of our own. If you prefer your horror without interruptions, and you'd like it early, ad-free, and fully uncensored,
You'll want to join our patrons area, just $7.99 a month, or even less if you commit to a full year, and you'll unlock access to every full episode in its raw, uninterrupted form.
just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons, or visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com to explore all your perks. Support independent horror and help us keep the screams coming.
You get the full collection, we get to keep the lights off. Everybody wins.
Now then, let's begin. Our first tale takes us to a coastal town where faith has taken root, but not the kind you'll find in any Sunday sermon. When a young man, desperate for meaning, finds a congregation hidden in plain sight, he discovers the cost of belief might be measured in blood. This is The Tall Man's Disciple by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. The tall man's booted feet made no sound as he stepped to the edge of the forest and stared at the 2 men seated on the break wall of the bay. The moonlight showed down on the wide, flat brim of his black planter hat, casting his unearthly pale face in shadow. A light Pacific breeze blew off Commencement Bay and rustled the branches of the pines against his black frock coat and dark trousers. As he watched the 2 men leaning close as they talked, he flexed his long, bony fingers and then balled them into fists so tight his long nails cut grooves in his thin, bloodless flesh. He exhaled a breath colder than the night's fall air as he moved out of the shadows of the forest and into the dim lighting of the deserted parking lot behind the men. The two young men were engrossed in conversation as he approached soundlessly. A raccoon hunting among the rocks of the bay recoiled as the deathly pale man passed, its dark eyes wide and glistening in the moonlight. The man's light blue eyes narrowed as he watched the dark-haired man touch the blond man's shoulder in a gesture of tenderness. The night air carried the voices to his ears as he closed the distance between them. "It's beautiful out here at night. It's my favorite place in Tacoma." David let his Colombian accent come through heavily as he said Tacoma. People always liked the exoticness of his accent, so he laid it on thick when he was trying to catch someone's attention, and he most definitely wanted to hold the young blond man's attention. That's Vashon Island, right?" Jeremy pointed across the bay to the sparse lights of the darkened island. "Yes, that's Vashon Island." David smiled as he pointed to the island and then gestured over his shoulder at the forest. "That's Point Defiance, and right in between is us." "Seeing the running water reminds me of home." Jeremy brushed a strand of hair away from his blue eyes. "From that twang in your voice, I'd say you're from the South." David let his desire for the man show in his eyes. "Alabama, born and bred." Jeremy smiled sheepishly. "Have you ever heard of the local stories about the tall man?" "No, that urban legend?" David waved a dismissive hand. "That's for the Nickelodeon crowd. They say he's the ghost of a dead minister that walks the shores of Commencement Bay looking for sinners. I've heard the stories. Tacoma's a sketchy enough place for people to disappear without some undead Bible thumper being the reason." No, really, I researched it." Jeremy stared over at the shadowy tree line of Vashon Island. "There was a Baptist minister named Gideon Hayes that came here from Mississippi in April 1855 during the Puget Sound War. Hayes believes the second coming of Christ would only occur after all the world's sinners either became Christians or were put to death. He saw the Native Americans as heathens that needed to convert to Christianity. Any Native Americans that did not convert or settlers that did not repent of their sins he put to the test." "Oh, what kind of test?" David slid closer, enjoying listening to Jeremy speak. He'd throw them off the cliff, Point Defiance. He believed God would make them float safely down like a feather if they were innocent, but if they were sinners, their bodies would break upon the rocks. David grimaced at the thought of the agonizing fall and bone-shattering impact of bodies upon the rocks. He was instrumental in relocating the local tribes from Vashon Island to Fox Island in January 1856. However, one night, some of the savages escaped from Fox Island and chased Hayes through the forest at Point Defiance. When they caught him, they tied him to a tree, sliced him open, and filled his body with straw so that his spirit could not pass into the other world. Sounds like, to me, the man got what he deserved. David brushed some dirt from the leg of his dark blue jeans. Hayes was described as unusually tall for the time, just like the tall man. The description of the clothing the tall man wears matches what a frontier minister would have worn in the 1850s. I believe there are so many disappearances between April and January along Commencement Bay because that's the time frame Hayes arrived in the area and was subsequently murdered on Point Defiance. The cycle repeats yearly, and there are never tall man sightings between January and April. "Well, if that's true," David put his hand tenderly on Jeremy's shoulder and gave the young man his most mischievous smile, "you'll need to protect me because a sinner like me would break like glass if you threw me down on the rocks." "Yeah, I was thinking that too." A coldness filled Jeremy's voice and eyes as he swung his arm and brought a fist-sized rock crashing into the side of David's head. David opened his mouth, but no sound emerged as he snapped forward and then back at the force of the blow. Blood poured down the side of his tanned face from the devastating wound to his temple as his eyes rolled back in his head. Jeremy shrugged the man's hand off his shoulder and pushed the man forward over the break wall. David's body striking the ground below reminded Jeremy of the sound a slaughtered sow made when it dropped from the meat hook on the farm back home. He stared down at the body. A young Latin man's head and leg lay at an odd angle as the tide began to dislodge him from the rocks. Soon, David would be dragged beneath Commencement Bay, food for the 5-gill sharks. As David's body slipped beneath the waves, a wicked smile crossed Jeremy's face. Beside him, the long shadow of a man in a wide-brimmed hat stretched along the floor. It's done. He's been judged. Jeremy smiled like a child awaiting his parents' approval as he looked into the pale face of the tall man. The slightest hint of a smile touched the thin, colorless lips of the thing that had once been Gideon Hayes. The figure nodded his head in approval. He was a gay. I knew he would break in the rocks. Jeremy slid the deer bone pocket knife out of his pants and flicked open the short, sharp blade. He pulled down the neck of his shirt to reveal 3 red, raw-looking crosscuts on his chest in various states of healing. Jeremy gritted his teeth into a sneer of half pain and half ecstasy as he slowly drew the tip of the knife against his pale chest, adding a 4th cross-like wound. The blood felt warm on his skin, juxtaposed against the chill of the night air. He let go of the neck of his shirt and followed the tall man as the dark figure turned back toward the woods. Jeremy first heard of the tall man from a classmate back in Cullum, Alabama. That night he spent hours on the internet reading stories of tall man sightings and his supposed victims. Prostitutes who serviced men in their cars, teens fornicating on the rocks, homosexuals and drug addicts. As far as Jeremy was concerned, the tall man was no evil specter. He was an avenging angel doing God's work. The tall man was doing the kinds of things Jeremy only dreamed of. When he came across the story of Gideon Hayes, a righteous man slaughtered by heathen savages, it all became clear in Jeremy's mind what he needed to do. He worked all summer and saved his money. Then one September morning, he got in his beat-up red Ford pickup truck and drove the 40 hours from Cullum to Tacoma, Washington. Jeremy slept in his truck during the day and wandered along the shores of Commencement Bay at night. Sometimes he sat in the forest watching men and women sneak down to the beach to do drugs or have sex, and he waited for the tall man to come and deliver the Lord's justice. But he never did. He was ready to give up and go back to Cullum the night he spied the tall figure, barely visible in the shadow of the Silver Cloud Motel as he stared out over the waters of Commencement Bay. The tall man paid little attention to Jeremy as he walked past him, trying to get up the nerve to speak to him, though he could see the pale blue eyes in the shadows following him as he walked by. Gideon Hayes. Jeremy turned back to the shadowy figure. You're Gideon Hayes, right? At the sound of the name, the tall man's head slowly turned to look at Jeremy. The tall man's face was translucently white beneath the wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes were beady and pale, icy blue. Jeremy felt his insides tighten as the figure stepped toward him out of the shadows. Bony hands with long white fingers protruded from the sleeves of the black frock coat as the figure reached toward Jeremy. I think what those heathen sandwiches did to you is terrible. Jeremy's knees felt weak as the tall man closed the distance between them. You're the Lord's servant on earth. You bring God's wrath on the wicked. I came here to help you. The tall man grabbed Jeremy by the front of his jacket and pulled him close so that his face was inches from his own. Jeremy felt his body shake with fear as the tall man's eyes seemed to study his face. The figure's breath was icy cold and stank of rotted leaves and wet straw. I can help you, and I can continue your work when you leave in January until you come back in April. The tall man let go of Jeremy's jacket and took a step back, his eyes running over Jeremy appraisingly. I can help you. Jeremy tried to force some strength back into his voice. I can be your disciple. A tight-lipped smile crossed the tall man's pale face that reached nearly his high cheekbones. Jiry looked down at the body of the red-haired prostitute. Her eyes were vacant, but her mouth still moved, as if she were still trying to speak as she lay broken on the rocks below Point Defiance. Some of her blood speckled his cheek, and he resisted the urge to wipe it off with his thumb and taste it. He slid the pocket knife from his pants and unzipped his heavy winter coat, eager to carve the 9th cross into his skin. The tall man stepped from the woods into the clearing, illuminated by January's full moon. Put up a bit of a fight at the end. Jiry smiled at the ethereal form. The tall man froze as a high-pitched animal cry sounded in the distance. The cry was almost dog or wolf-like, but the pitch sounded way off to Jiry. The second cry echoed in the distance, then a third, much closer than the first. What is that? Puffs of warm vapor rapidly escaped Jiry's mouth into the cold night air as he felt his breathing quicken. Sounds of strange cries and running feet filled the forest. Jiry gripped the pocket knife tightly in his hand, his eyes darting left and right, trying to see what was happening in the darkened woods. The tall man seemed to be backing away from him, moving to the far side of the clearing. "Gideon, what's happening?" Suddenly the forest went deathly quiet. Jiry could only hear the pounding of his own pulse in his ears. The tall man slowly turned his head to the forest as ethereal forms materialized out of the darkness. The forms of 12 buckskin-clad Native American tribesmen began to step out of the forest, each gripping a tomahawk or deerbone knife in near gaunt hands. Jiry gasped as he looked into their faces. Their desiccated skin pulled tightly over their skeletal heads so that their lips pulled back from their teeth. Their noses were sunken holes in their face, and cold black orbs sat where their eyes should have been, so dark not even the moonlight reflected off them. "Is this why you disappear every January?" A horrible dawning filled Jiry. "Do they kill you again every year?" The tribesmen looked from the tall man to Jiry as they spread out, blocking any escape into the forest. "Gideon, we can fight them." Jiry held his pocket knife toward the tribesman and balled his other hand into a fist. One of the tribesmen looked down at the body sprawled in the rocks below. His skeletal face was expressionless as he looked back at the tall man and shifted the grip on his tomahawk. The tall man looked at the skeletal tribesman and raised his arm, extending a pale, bony finger toward Jiry. The tribesman turned those black eyes toward Jiry and slowly pointed his tomahawk at him. "Gideon, what are you doing? Help me!" Jiry raised his pocket knife as 2 of the tribesmen rushed toward him. One of the skeletal tribesmen easily battered the small knife out of Jiry's hand as the other landed a stunning blow to his forehead with the flat side of the tomahawk. Jiry reeled from the blow as blood flowed down from the gash in his forehead into his eyes. Skeletal hands gripped his arms with vice-like strength, holding him fast. Jiry tried to struggle free of their hands, but they only tightened their grip until he fell to his knees and cried out in pain. Blinking blood and tears from his eyes, Jiry saw the tall man starting to walk toward the woods. "Gideon!" His voice sounded hoarse as he called out, but the tall man never even looked back as he moved toward the woods. It suddenly became clear to Jiry that Gideon Hayes had only accepted him so he could take the tall man's place on this fated January night. He, not Gideon, would be tied to the tree, gutted and filled with straw this night. "Gideon, don't leave me!" Tears of pain, fear, and betrayal ran down Jiry's cheeks as he cried out to his mentor in futility. Jiry watched through the blood and tears as 2 tribesmen blocked the tall man's path to the woods. The wide-brimmed hat moved back and forth as he was shaking his head, and the tribesmen grabbed him. The tall man tried to pull back, but 2 tribesmen forced him to the ground. His hat tumbled away as the tribesmen began to drag him toward a tree, a third following behind with a length of rope. The tall man violently shook his pale, bald head as they pulled him across the cold ground. His mouth contorted into a moan, and a sound like "no" escaped his lips, the first sound Jeremy had ever heard him make in the 3 months they'd been together. The tribesman dragged the tall man up to a standing position, and, with his back to a tree, yanking his arms roughly behind him as they bound him to the tree. The moonlight illuminated his pale face, now a mask of terror, as a long strand of drool dripped from the corner of his mouth. The tribesman, with a long-bladed deer-bone knife, stepped in front of the tall man as one of the others tore open his frock coat and shirt to reveal a pale, sunken chest. His icy blue eyes followed the blade as the tribesman raised it high up into the air and then sliced the knife down the tall man's body from neck to crotch in a deep cutting motion. The tall man screamed and howled in pain as the blade cut him wide open, and the tribesman reached into the wound and pulled it open wide with a sickening tearing sound. Jeremy vomited as this foul-smelling black blood and rotted innards poured forth from the tall man and sloshed to the ground. A long blackened stain of intestines hung from his open bowels to the rotted pile of organs and blood. The tall man's head bobbed lifelessly as a tribesman stepped forward and shoved handfuls of straw into the empty husk of the tall man. Relief flooded Jeremy at the thought that Gideon's plan to trade places with him had failed. He would get into his pickup truck and drive straight back to Cullum this very night. Globs of bile and vomit hung to his lips as he looked up at the tribesmen holding him. They stared back down at him with those blackened orbs, then looked up at their leader, who was studying the tall man's corpse. He poked his tomahawk at the tall man's head, making it loll from side to side. Then he cast his black eyes, toward Jeremy and the two tribesmen, and jerked his head. With remarkable strength for such skeletal limbs, the two tribesmen effortlessly heaved Jeremy upward into the air and off the cliff. Jeremy screamed as he fell backward through the air, the cold wind rushing past his body as he hurtled toward the jagged rocks below. The impact was jarring as his back splintered against the rocks, the agonizing pain of his shattering limbs suddenly replaced by a lack of sensation. His broken body lay strewn and unmoving amidst the rocks, the black eyes of the tribesmen staring down at him from the cliff above. The waters of Commencement Bay rushed over him, filling his mouth and lungs. Jeremy gagged and spat, expelling the water and gasping for air as the water receded. Second wave broke over him, filling his mouth. Jeremy's eyes opened wide with fear as his lungs burned with an effort to gasp for air as wave after wave broke over him as the water slowly rose above his face, stinging his eyes. He stared at the bubbles coming from his mouth, breaking the water's surface as a skeletal hand brushed his cheek and closed around his chin. Kelp and seaweed swayed from the hand as it turned Jeremy's head side to side. The rotted face of David, his eyes white and milky, his gray skin pockmarked from the bites of sea creatures, stared back at him. A final rush of water surged into Jeremy's mouth as he tried to scream. David's rotted fingers closed around Jeremy and pulled him down into the depths of the bay. That was The Tall Man's Disciple by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
And if that story gave you chills, it's just the first whisper. All 5 tales in tonight's episode come from Jack Finn's upcoming horror collection, They Come When You Sleep, 16 Tales of Horror and the Supernatural.
Don't answer the invitation to slumber. Your eyelids grow heavy. The bedside lamp flickers. That sound. Was it just the house settling? Finn's collection invites you to stay awake just a little longer with nightmares featuring haunted dolls, cursed artifacts, and monstrous awakenings in the dark.
It's available August 29th, 2025 on Amazon, published by Velox Books. Just $17.95 for the paperback, or grab the Kindle edition for a mere $2.99. Pre-order now and save yourself a few bucks, and maybe your soul.
Because sleep's when they come, and Jack Finn, he'll make you think twice before turning out the light.
Stay tuned for more terrifying tales from They Come When You Sleep, right here on Scary Stories Told in the Dark.
Our next tale leaves the coast behind for a different battleground, one caught between colonial decay and divine vengeance. When an aging missionary returns to a village he once tried to save, he finds that the gods he silenced have not forgotten.
Fanaticism, fire, and something ancient that never left. This is The Feast of Angels by Jack Finn, performed by me, Malcolm Blackwood. Ellico sat cross-legged on the earthen floor. He held the 1-foot-length chain by its middle link and swung it gently over the large square of dark cloth lying flat on the ground. The thin chain consisted of 4 concave nuts from an opaly tree linked at equidistant intervals down each side. As the village's babalawo, their shaman, the divination chain was Ellico's means of channeling Orunmila, the Yoruba god of wisdom and knowledge. Across from him, Adagba, the leader of the village's hunters' guild, the Egbe Ode, sat cross-legged, watching the chain pendulum over the cloth. Sweat beaded along the forehead of the man's midnight black skin, and his dark eyes gazed intermittently from the chain to Ellico, who chanted the sacred Odu of Ifa. With a flick of his wrist, Ellico cast the string of nuts onto the cloth. It landed in a twisted snake-like pattern as if a great serpent writhed on the floor. Both men leaned forward and peered intently at the configuration of the chain. "What does the opele tell you, Ellico?" The broad, muscular shoulders of the hunter visibly knotted with tension. Ellico stared at the divination chain, his lips pursed as he studied every twist and turn. The babalawo blew out a deep breath and sat back, his eyes filled with regret when he finally looked up at the hunter. Adagba met his gaze, searching his face for meaning, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "It is bad, then." Adagba got slowly to his feet. "Yes, it is bad," Ellico nodded as he looked at the larger man. "Orunmila sees that these Christians will bring grief upon us. Then we must fight." Adagba slammed his fist into his open palm as he began to pace the floor of Ellico's simple home. "Adagba," Ellico spoke softly, "more villagers join the Christians on their hill outside the village daily. They are abandoning the ways of our ancestors by the lure of this nailed god." "Have you seen the market?" Adagba pointed toward the front door, but Ellico knew he meant the village market beyond. "No one sells carvings of the gods anymore. There are no more charms or amulets, just wooden crosses. All we can do is adhere to the old ways, be there for our people who still believe." Ellico forced a smile. "This will pass in time. These English holy men will tire of our little village and leave. Our people will return to the gods." "No," Adagba's eyes blazed with defiance. "I will reform the Egbe Aro, and we will fight these Christians just like we fought the Oyos in my great-grandfather's time. I will take the head of the Englishman and place it upon a spike along the heads of that traitor Ajayi and the twinnings Yemisi and Bola." "Adagba," Ellico got to his feet and placed a calming hand on the hunter's arm. "Do not do anything rash. Do not do anything to Ajayi or the twinnings. Steer clear of the Englishman on the hill. I will speak to Adamola today. The chief will know what to do." "It may already be too late." Adagba shook his head. His dark eyes held a hint of sorrow when they looked upon the shaman. "Most of my hunters have already gone to worship the nailed god, and Ajayi and the twinnings convert more of our people daily." Adagba gave Ellico a resigned nod and reached for the door handle leading out into the courtyard when he stopped and cast a sidelong look toward the small wooden table beside Ellico's bed. The big man turned and stared at the skeleton of the small monkey perched on the table as if it sat on a tree branch. "Is there something wrong, Adagba?" Eliko raised an eyebrow and cocked his head at the man. "The monkey," Adagba squinted at the skeleton and then looked at Eliko. "When I entered your home, I was sure the monkey's arms stood raised. Now they rest in the monkey's lap. Tunde is just a skeleton, bones held together with wire and twine. He could no more raise an arm than I could a heavy rock." Eliko gave a little laugh and looked at the skeleton. Adagba shook his head and looked around the small dwelling. Amulets and charms of stone, branches, and bones hung on the walls alongside ornately carved images of the gods. "Of everything in your home, nothing disquiets me like that little monkey. Why don't you let me bring you a live monkey from the woods to keep you company?" "Thank you, Adagba," Eliko smiled. "Tunde is good company and much quieter than a living monkey. I like to think of him as a messenger from Ishu." "Well, if he is a messenger from Ishu, I hope the trickster god is watching over you." Adagba looked back at the house as he opened the door. "Ajayi and the Twinnings are not just preaching to turn from our gods. They are telling people to destroy their graven images. Your home will not sit well in the minds of these Christians." Eliko nodded in sad acknowledgement to Adagba as he closed the door behind the hunter. He leaned his bald head against the door and sighed deeply, troubled by the times in which he lived. Then he cast a sidelong look at the monkey skeleton on the bedside table. "Why do you take such risks, Tunde?" Eliko turned to face the skeleton, folding his arms across his chest. "Adagba is a friend and a believer in the gods, but even he has limits." Tunde hopped down from the table and skittered across the floor, his skeletal feet making tiny striations in the earthen floor. The creature leaped up, sailing through the air to land softly on Eliko's shoulder like a butterfly on a flower. Eliko chuckled as Tunde nuzzled his bony skull against the Babalawu's smooth head, and the shaman stroked the creature's spine lovingly. Eliko did not understand the magic that reanimated the dead monkey, and he had not lied to Adagba when he said he thought the monkey was a messenger from Ishu, the Yoruba trickster god. He had found the monkey abandoned in the forest, sick and near death. The shaman had wrapped the frail monkey in a blanket and brought it home. He nursed it day and night with herbs and medicines. Eliko's heart would melt at the monkey's human-like eyes staring at him as he ministered to it. The look was the closest thing he had ever seen to pure love. When the monkey died in his arms 2 weeks later, the old shaman cried unabashedly, wetting the dead monkey's face with his tears. Eliko buried Tunde, the name he once planned to name a son, in the courtyard of the house in a sunny spot the poor creature seemed to enjoy in its short life. When he awoke to find the skeletal form perched on his bedside table several days later, he felt no fear. Eliko recognized him as a gift from the gods. He welcomed Tunde home, but kept his true nature a secret from the villagers. To all who visited his home, the monkey skeleton was just another odd accoutrement in the shaman's home of talismans and carvings. Tunde cast the hollows of his eye sockets down to the divination chain sprawled on the cloth, and the monkey's clean white jawbone chittered its teeth together. "Yes, Tunde," Eliko nodded and petted the tiny skeleton again. "The Opele says death is coming to the village." The Opele says death is coming to the village. As Eliko walked through the village streets to the market, he sensed an air of tension and hostility that he had never felt before. Once friendly faces, villagers he had known for a lifetime, scowled at him or averted their eyes as they walked past. A few still smiled and called greetings, but the village where he spent his whole life seemed wholly unwelcoming. The Englishman has sown much discord within the village, Eliko thought, as a childhood friend stared at him with openly distrusting eyes. Minister John Cotton had arrived outside the village over a month ago, accompanied by Ajayi, a Christian convert from Okioden. The English minister set up a makeshift church on a hill beside the village, and Jiry came among the people and preached the gospel of the nailed God. At first, the man met with varying degrees of scorn and indifference from the villagers, who still worshipped the old gods of the Yoruba. Then, the Abije, the twin brother and sister, Yemisi and Bola, converted to Christianity. They stopped wearing traditional Yoruba clothing made from the hand-woven asuoki in favor of clothing of European style Minister John provided them. Soon, villagers converted in droves, leaving the village daily to worship their new god on the hill. One morning, Eliko stopped a family carrying wooden statues of the gods with them. Some were very old, likely handed down from several generations, and Eliko asked where they were going. "We are taking them up the hill," the father answered, "to burn as we ask forgiveness from the one true God for our sin of idol worship. You should do the same, Eliko. Make yourself right with God before the day of judgment arrives, or you will burn for all eternity in the lake of fire." Eliko had been aghast that they were burning such sacred objects, but he had seen many families repeating the journey up the hill with charms, talismans, and wooden figures. As he entered the marketplace, Eliko was surprised to see most villagers were wearing European shirts and trousers, or dresses and head coverings for the women. Only a few women wore the traditional wraparound skirt, loose-fitting blouse, and head tie. Fewer men wore agbadas, the customary Yoruba robe, and fila caps. Gone altogether were the colorful dyes, beadwork, and stitching that made Yoruba clothing so beautiful to behold. They were replaced now by the drab, dark, unadorned clothing of the Europeans. Eliko saw a small crowd around a young man in a jacket and trousers holding a leather-bound book high. The man appeared to be speaking animatedly, and Eliko recognized him as Jiry, Minister John's envoy to the village. The shaman quickly turned away and approached a gray-haired man in a European jacket with various vegetables on a dark blanket. "Good morning, Saburi," Eliko smiled as he looked over the vegetables, nodding with appreciation at the excellent selection. "I will take 3 of those delicious-looking yams and 5 of those plantains." "They're not for sale," Saburi scowled as he waved a hand over the produce. "Oh," the smile slipped from Eliko's. "Then I will take 6 eggs." "Not for sale." Saburi's dark eyes were hard and cold as they stared at the shaman. "Very well, then. Good day to you, Saburi." Eliko smiled and nodded at Saburi as he moved on to the next outstretched blanket. However, as Eliko moved from blanket to blanket, the villagers were unwilling to sell him okra, rice, beans, or moin bean cake. In one case, immediately after refusing to sell Eliko panmo, a delicacy made from cow skin, the man sold the piece to a young man in a white shirt and trousers. "Good morning, Eliko. How are you enjoying the market this day?" a soft voice behind Eliko said. The shaman turned to see Jiry with his broad, ever-present smile, flanked by the twins, Yemisi and Bola, approaching him. "It seems like quite an unprofitable day for the market." Eliko forced a smile and gestured toward the table of meats. "They have carried all these fine foods to the market, yet none are for sale." "That is because these foods are only for the chosen of God." Yemisi's eyes had the coldness of a crocodile when she spoke. "They are for the children of God to prepare for the Feast of Angels," Bola, the older brother, by less than a minute added as he brushed dirt from his black trousers. "What is this Feast of Angels?" Eliko chose to ignore the twins and addressed Jiry directly. "Let me share with you the word of God, Eliko." The grinning Jiry held the holy book before him. "I will teach you about the God, his angels, and all his bountiful blessings." "Thank you for the offer, Jiry," Eliko smiled and dipped his head in thanks. "I have worshipped the Oriza for all my long life. I feel Ogun, Shango, Jakuta, and all the Oriza who serve the great Oloran around me all the time. My house would feel very empty with just one god in it." "Then you will burn in the hellfires of damnation." Bola's eyes were wide and filled with a fanatical gleam. "Bola," Jiry grimaced momentarily, and then the toothy smile returned. Yamizi placed a restraining hand on her brother's chest. What my brother means is that the one true God offers eternal life and happiness to those who believe. However, a far different fate awaits those who deny him. Eliko studied the twins carefully and found Yamizi's calm coldness more frightening than Bola's stormy volatility. In the Yoruba culture, the second twin was the elder and wiser, having sent its sibling out into the world first to ensure all was well. The shaman felt this aptly applied to Yamizi and Bola. Yamizi was all calculation and cunning, while Bola was brash and hot-headed. "Come read with me for a while, Eliko," Ajayi tapped the book. "Our God is a God of peace and love, and when you return to the market, you will find everything for sale again." Why would a God of peace and love turn neighbor against neighbor simply over a difference of beliefs? Eliko looked into Ajayi's wide, welcoming eyes, but noticed the corners of the man's mouth twitch slightly at his words. The Yoruba have many gods, and it is no fault to favor one over the other. Bola muttered, but quickly quieted when he saw his sister shoot him a withering look. "You are a holy man, and of course you have many questions." Ajayi touched Eliko lightly upon the shoulder. "Come up the hill with me. We can discuss these things with Minister John." "Why does your Minister John not come down to the village?" Eliko sweepingly gestured to encompass the marketplace. "We can discuss these things in front of the whole village. I am sure many would be interested to hear." "Minister John will be here for the Feast of Angels." Bola looked sidelong at his sister, as if expecting a rebuke. "What is this feast you speak of?" Eliko caught Ajayi's hint of annoyance again at Bola's words. "The feast is a celebration in honor of the Lord's mighty host of angels." Ajayi raised his eyes toward the sky. "The Lord of hosts will prepare a lavish banquet for all people on this mountain." Yamizi stares unwaveringly at Eliko. "It's from Isaiah 25:6. A commotion drew their attention, and Eliko could see Adigba in a heated argument with one of the villagers selling vegetables. The tall hunter held a yam in one hand and pointed angrily at the villager, who adamantly shook his head, further enraging Agdaba. "It appears Agdaba has just discovered that none of the food at today's market is for sale." Eliko watched the heated exchange a moment longer, then turned to Ajayi and the twins. "You may worship a god of peace and love, but Agdaba worships Jakuta, the Oriza of thunder, lightning, and fire. Unless you are eager to meet your god this afternoon, I suggest you not cross paths with him when he is in such a foul mood." "I wish you an enjoyable afternoon." The smiling Ajayi nodded to Eliko and gestured for Yamizi and Bola to follow him in the opposite direction of Adigba. Yamizi gave Eliko a curt nod, and Bola eyed him warily as they trailed behind Ajayi. He turned back, sighed, and saw a small crowd forming around Adigba and the villager. The village was peaceful and harmonious only a few weeks ago. "Eliko! Eliko!" A large, heavy-set man called to the shaman from a courtyard doorway across the market. The man's meaty, dark brown arm gestured for Eliko to join him. Eliko smiled to see at least Chief Ademola still wore a traditional brown Yoruba robe and matching fila cap. They had been friends since childhood, and the village chieftain often sought Eliko's advice and divination abilities in resolving dilemmas. If anyone could navigate the village through this Minister John's business, it was Ademola. "Eliko, my old friend, how are you?" The village chieftain had a broad, welcoming face and a booming laugh that often became infectious. "I am well, my friend." Eliko embraced his old friend in greeting, "though my heart is troubled." "Oh?" Ademola's face creased into a frown. "Come in, Eliko. Let's talk." "I am concerned about these Christians." Eliko followed Ademola into the courtyard. "I was just in the marketplace and had attempted to buy—" Eliko's words trailed into a grave silence, and Ademola stared at the shaman with concern. "What is it, Eliko?" "What is that, Ademola?" Elliko pointed toward the chieftain's home at the large wooden cross that hung beside the door. Ademola followed Eliko's gaze and closed the courtyard door to give them privacy. When the chieftain turned to face Elliko, his face was a mask of shame. "Ademola, have you become a Christian?" Elliko could not hide the sadness and disappointment in his voice. No. Ademola shook his head but did not meet Eliko's eyes. "You know me, Elliko. I believe in the gods." "Then what is that doing here?" Elliko gave Ademola a withering look as he pointed at the cross. "Elliko, we must be able to change with the times," Ademola shrugged. "The English and the Christian God are here. We cannot ignore that. We can still believe in the gods in our hearts, but we must join with the others and their minister John." "The others?" Elliko searched his friend's face. "How many others have gone up the hill to minister John?" "Almost everyone, Elliko. That's what I wanted to speak to you about." Ademola looked pained. "Most of the village has already joined Jiry and those damned twinnings. All of the elders, except old Oluwole, have become Christians. If I am to be their chieftain, I must be a leader of the village, not an outsider like you, Adegba, and Oluwole. Then lead the people out of this darkness that turns friend into foe." Elliko grabbed the chieftain by the shoulders. "There is still time." "No, Elliko, there is no more time." Elliko recoiled from the deep look of grief he saw in Ademola's eyes. "What do you mean?" Eliko's voice came out hoarse as his throat dried with a horrible apprehension. "Minister John refuses to come into the village as long as there are blaspheming idols here. Tomorrow, on Ojo Aiku, the day Minister John calls Sunday, they will hold their Feast of Angels here in the village. Ajayi and the others intend to remove all the offending items from the village before then, starting with the wards placed around the village." Elliko looked up in alarm. "Ademola, you are our chief, the Oba of this village. You cannot let that happen. Those wards guard against evil spirits. They have existed since our ancestors came to this village to protect the children of Oduduwa." "Elliko, there is nothing I can do. The people will not listen to me and go against Ajayi and Minister John. They believe in all that has been promised them from this nailed god." A pained look crossed Ademola's pleasant face. "Listen to me. Leave this place right now. Go up the hill and join the Christians. I cannot protect you from what may come if you do not." Elliko dropped the long wooden locking bar into place as he closed his courtyard door, something he had not done in decades. The conversation with Ademola had badly shaken him, and he felt a fear unlike he had ever experienced before. He knew the Opele spoke the truth when the divination chain revealed that death was coming to the village. However, now Elliko wondered if it was coming for him too. Tunde chittered noisily as Elliko stepped through the doorway, hopping from one skeletal foot to another. "Yes, Tunde, I feel it too," Elliko nodded. "Something bad is coming." The monkey skeleton hopped onto the wooden table where Elliko ate his meals and watched the shaman with his dark, hollow eye sockets. Elliko removed several wooden images of the gods from their places on shelves. There was the image of Ocean, who had once belonged to his mother, the images of Ogun and Ishu he had carved as a child, and the carved totem of Obatala, covered in a sacred white cloth that had been in his family for generations. The shaman placed these lovingly on his bed. Elliko added the Opele and several other precious talismans to the pile. They were irreplaceable and more beloved to Elliko than life itself. The shaman took a small bowl from the table, and Tunde cocked his head curiously as the shaman slid the wooden bed to the side and dug in the earthen floor, using the bowl as a makeshift shovel. Tunde hopped onto the bed and stared into the hole, then over at Eliko's sweat-streaked bald head. The shaman sat back on his behind and let out a deep breath. He turned to the monkey and smiled, petting the creature's skull with a dirty hand. Tunde made a chattering noise with his teeth and glanced into the hole. "No, Tunde," Eliko smiled. "You are not going back into the hole." Eliko wrapped the idols and talismans in his mother's old blue head tie and placed the bundle gently into the hole. He filled the hole with reverence, secreting away the precious items. The shaman put a small rug over the area to hide the disturbed dirt, then pushed the bed back into place. Satisfied he had done his best to hide the items, Eliko flopped onto the bed, tired from the stress and exertion of the day. Tunde hopped onto the bedside table, his skeletal tail swaying slightly. The monkey leaned in close to Eliko, chittering quietly. "I know, Tunde," Eliko stroked the monkey's back. "I am afraid too." Eliko was awoken from a restless night's sleep by shouts and pounding on his courtyard door. He sat up, suddenly alert, the night air feeling stale and oppressive. There was an acrid smell of smoke in the air, and Tunde was hopping with alarm on the table. A loud cracking noise accompanied the thumping on his courtyard door, and Eliko knew that the locking bar would fail shortly. "Tunde, you must hide." Eliko's voice came out in a panicked hiss. "Now!" The skeletal monkey scurried around the small dwelling, looking for a place to curl and secret away. Outside, the locking bar gave way with a loud crash, and Eliko heard angry voices rush into the courtyard. He was not violent. It was not in his nature. He would reason with them, but not resist. Eliko stood and flattened out the creases in his robe with sweaty hands. He looked and could not see Tunde. Smiling, he said a silent prayer to Ishu to keep the mischievous monkey safe. The shaman jumped as the door crashed open and men rushed in the door. They were faces he recognized, knew, and laughed with. But tonight the men's dark, sweaty faces held nothing but malicious in wide, crazed eyes. They threw Eliko to the ground, strong hands pulling and punching him. Kicks rained down on his body, and he desperately tried to cover his head. The room became a cacophony as the men smashed and splintered all they could find. Eliko gasped and grunted as they kicked and punched him mercilessly. Then all became still. Men still held his arms and legs, but the rest backed away. Eliko spit out a mouthful of blood and looked toward the doorway as Bola entered the room. The man's white shirt was soaked red with blood, and he carried a thick 2-foot wooden cross in his hands. Blood and gore darkened the cross's wood and dripped onto Eliko's floor. Bola's eyes stared hatefully at Eliko as he slowly approached. "This is the home of a blasphemer and idol worshipper," Bola addressed the mob of men. "Burn it all." The men cheered wildly, and Bola grinned at their adulation. He stood directly above Eliko and stared at the shaman, his eyes wide and nostrils flaring. Eliko met his gaze defiantly. He would not give Bola the satisfaction of seeing any fear in his eyes. Bola gave a feral scream as he raised the cross high above his head, bringing it crashing down on Eliko's skull. Eliko felt the jarring blow echo through his head, and his vision swooned before all went black. Consciousness came slowly back to Eliko. His head throbbed and his eyes failed to focus correctly. He could not move his arms or legs, and the shaman struggled to fill his lungs with air. Eliko heard someone calling his name from far off and turned toward the sound. After blinking several times, the battered face of the elder Olawole slowly came into focus. The man was mouthing something through bruised lips, and after several moments, Eliko realized the man was saying his name. Incomprehensibly, Olawole seemed to be flying, soaring like a bird with outstretched arms. "Eliko, can you hear me?" Olawole's voice was a desperate whisper. "Olawole?" Eliko's voice sounded weak and faint in his ears. "Yes, Eliko, it's me." The man's face was swollen and bruised. "Do you know what happened to Abagda?" "Abagda? No." Eliko struggled to shake his head. Then he peered groggily at the elder. "Olawole, am I flying too?" "Flying? Eliko, wake up. They are crucifying us like their nailed god." Olawole's words finally jarred Eliko back to full consciousness. Eliko blinked and saw the sun was low in the sky, early evening by his account. He looked at Olawale and realized the man was bound to a large wooden cross several feet off the ground. Thick ropes tied Olawale's outstretched arms to the cross and his feet to the lower portion. The shaman saw that his arms and feet were similarly affixed to a cross. With some effort, Eliko could lean his head forward far enough to see a dozen crosses standing before the marketplace, where villagers were busy placing large plates of food on a long wooden table. Some cast furtive glances toward the men and women on the crosses, and others sneered and laughed at the crucified figures. But most averted their eyes. Eliko saw Ademola, dressed in a European coat and trousers, glance toward Eliko and quickly look away. Eliko's cross was closest to the woods at the end of the 12 crosses. Thoughts of escape quickly faded as he heard a mixture of laughs and cries emanate down the line of crucified villagers. He craned his neck, and he could see Bola, a long spear grasped in his hands, making his way down the line of crosses. Bola would thrust the spear into the crucified villager, and he would laugh cruelly as they cried out. Eliko watched the twin make his way down the line. Thrust, laugh, move. Bola, how could you do this to your own people? Olawale stared down at the man, shaking his head. Thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword, Bola spouted with fanatical zeal as he thrust the spear into Olawale. The gore-slick spear slipped in Bola's hands, the pointed tip grazing Olawale's chest, leaving a bright red line and sliding into the elder's eye. Bola frowned as he pulled the spear free with a sickening sucking noise, and Olawale's head lolled forward lifelessly. That was not supposed to happen, Bola shrugged and grinned at Eliko. Our Lord and Savior was pierced as he suffered on the cross. Minister John wishes you heathens to feel that pain. Bola thrust the spear upward, and Eliko grunted as he felt the tip slide into his left side just below the ribs. Eliko gritted his teeth, waiting for the pain to subside in a mind-numbing throb. I had you placed here last, Eliko. Bola's grin was broad and filled with malice. I wanted you to have the perfect view of the feast. Bola laughed as he joined the others around the large table. From the corner of his eye, Eliko saw Ademola watching the exchange and turned toward the chieftain. Their eyes met momentarily, and Ademola's mouth moved as if he was going to speak. Then he hung his head and turned away. As his lifeblood leaked from the wound in his side, Eliko watched the villagers assemble around the table. Had it not been for their dark skin and black hair, Eliko imagined this was how European church gatherings likely looked. The men in their fine black jackets and pants, the women in long dark dresses. A hush came over the villagers as Jiry led a tall blond man dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and wide-brimmed black hat into the village. Eliko knew this must be Minister John. The man was tall and lean, with beady blue eyes and a sharp, pointed nose. Praise the Lord, you his angels, you mighty ones who do his bidding, who obey his word. Minister John raised his hand skyward as he greeted the assembled villagers. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Many villagers raised their arms in imitation of the minister, while others knelt and clasped their hands together in prayer. Several shouted, Hallelujah, and other praises that Eliko could not hear clearly. Human beings ate the bread of angels. He sent them all the food they could eat. Minister John gestured to the bounty of food the villagers had assembled. Jiry and Yamizi stood behind Minister John as he extolled the goodness of the villagers, the bountifulness of their feast, and their devotion to the one true God. With the assistance of Brother Jiry and Sister Yamizi, Minister John gestured to the two, who bowed their heads deferentially to the man, I have chosen this village amongst all the Christians in the land to host the angels' feast. Jiry and Yamizi gave smiles that did not reach their eyes as the villagers cheered at the minister's words and sang the praises of their new God. The minister began to stomp his feet and flail his arms in a chaotic dance, shaking his body wildly as he chanted and called out to God and the angels. Elliko saw many of the villagers imitating the same mad, frenetic dancing. "He will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other." Minister John shouted above the din of the feast, and Jiry raised an ivory horn to his lips and blew a loud clarion call. A thunderclap overhead answered the horn call, and Elliko raised his head to see clouds swirling over the village, moving in a circular pattern unlike he had ever seen before. Many of the villagers looked skyward in awe. Elliko felt something thump against his outstretched arm, and with great effort he turned to look. Tunde's hollow eyes stared back at him as the creature chittered at him. "Tunde," Elliko smiled through the pain of his injuries at the sight of the skeleton. "You are alive. I was so worried about you." The monkey's head cocked this way and that as he surveyed the ropes binding Elliko. Then he scampered down the length of the cross, and the shaman could feel the monkey's skeletal claws against his feet. With fierce determination, the small monkey sank its teeth into the rope binding and began to tear at the strands. "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly." Minister John had stopped dancing and thrust his arms heavenward. "Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne, and the living creatures, and the elders." The villagers stood transfixed as the swirling cloud took on the shape of flying forms, dozens of human-like creatures. They were snow-white, with broad feathered wings and long flowing hair of golden blonde. To Elliko, they circled the village like vultures over a carcass. Men and women fell to their knees praising the nailed god, some weeping uncontrollably. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. Minister John's voice sounded loud, shrill, and maniacal as he looked from the flying angels to the villagers. It was time to feast. Elliko saw the feral grin on Minister John's face as the first angel dove from the sky. The soft white skin of its face stretched wide as the creature crashed into Adamola, driving the chieftain to the ground, its mouth full of jagged teeth sinking into his face. The angel raked long, sharp talons across Adamola's body, spilling his innards onto the earth in a rush of hot blood. Voices raised in praise and worship turned to screams of pain and terror as the angels swooped from the sky and tore into the villagers, feeding upon them in a blood frenzy. Elliko felt the ropes around his feet slacken as Tunde climbed back up the cross and began working on the bindings around his right hand. "Hurry, Tunde!" Elliko looked from the monkey to the angels darting from the sky in terror. Minister John surveyed the scene, grinning and laughing, as Jiry and Yamizi smirked behind him as the villagers called out to save them. "Eat, my angels, eat!" Minister John laughed and clapped his hands. Elliko saw Yamizi watch impassively as one of the angels fell upon her brother, tearing his face from his skull before sinking its long teeth into his neck, Bola's red blood splattering the pure white wings. Amid the carnage, a tall man stepped from the shadows, and Elliko quickly recognized Adigba. The hunter bore a long spear in each hand. Elliko did not know if he was more amazed that Adigba had survived the purge of non-Christians or that the man had returned to aid those that had forsaken him. Elliko watched as Adigba reared back one mighty shoulder and let one of the spears fly. The long shaft sailed through the air and pierced the chest of one of the angels. The creature pirouetted out of the sky like skewered meat and crashed to the ground in a pile of broken wings and bones. The hunter raised his fist triumphantly and readied another spear just as 3 angels fell upon him, teeth and claws tearing at the valiant warrior. Elliko turned away from the grisly scene, but could not block out the anguished sounds of Adigba's dying screams. Tunde freed the shaman's right hand, and Eliko silently prayed to the gods that the monkey could free him before an angel spotted him. However, for the time being, the angels seemed fully occupied, feasting upon the villagers. The night carried the iron-like scent of blood and the terrified and pain-filled cries of the village converts as the feast of angels continued unabated. Eliko groaned as pain shot through his wounded side. The monkey freed the shaman's left hand from the bonds, and his body tumbled from the cross to land hard upon the earth. Tunde hopped down, landing beside the shaman, his skeletal face closely inspecting Eliko's dark features. "I'm okay, Tunde," Eliko grimaced and placed a hand over his wound. "We need to get to Obiakuta. The city is fortified. They will be able to stand against these Christians and their angels." Eliko got slowly to his feet, still numb from the bindings, and swooning, realized how significantly weakened he was by his wounds. "We do not have much time, Tunde." Eliko pressed a hand firmly against his wounded side. "I fear my life force is draining from me like the sands of an hourglass." Tunde hopped onto his shoulder, and the shaman ran a loving hand over the creature. He half ran, half stumbled into the forest darkness, leaving the dying cries of his village behind him. They stuck to the cover provided by the canopy of trees to hide from any angels searching the woods overhead for more victims. Beads of sweat dotted Eliko's forehead and bulged scalp like glistening pearls when he finally stopped against a tree to catch his breath. Tunde hopped from his shoulder and scurried into the underbrush as Eliko stared after him. The shaman noted that the edges of his vision were black, a further sign that his body was quickly failing. "Tunde, have you finally run back to Ishu?" Eliko called after the disappearing form of the skeletal monkey. However, when Tunde returned moments later, the monkey gripped large handfuls of green leaves and bright red flowers in his bony fingers. Eliko watched the monkey shove the leaves and flowers between his bone-white jaws and teeth, grinding them into a mushy red-green ball that he spat back into his paws. The monkey's hollow eye sockets gazed up at Eliko as he held out the ball to the shaman and placed it in his palm. "What's this?" Eliko sniffed the ball and raised his eyebrows in surprise. "The flowers and leaves of a roselle plant." Tunde pointed to the wound on Eliko's side. The shaman nodded and winced as he packed the ground mixture into the wound. The wound was raw and painful, but the medicinal plant took some stinging away within a few minutes. "I am ready," Eliko nodded to Tunde, and the little monkey hopped back onto his shoulder. The two pushed on through the night, stopping only once more for Eliko to drink cool water from a stream. As the shaman knelt to drink, he spied two piercing yellow eyes staring at him through the darkness. He could smell the stink of the beast's breath on the night air, and the guttural growl of the lion knotted Eliko's innards with fear. To come all this way only to be eaten by a lion. The thought almost made Eliko laugh. Tunde stepped forward, placing himself between the lion and Eliko. The small monkey silently stared at the lion, the dark hollows of his eye sockets meeting the lion's gaze until the beast receded further into the forest darkness and troubled them no more. Eliko rose and staggered into the night, with Tunde following behind. The night was giving way to sunrise as they approached Abiyakuta, the horizon glowing a golden orange as the sun rose behind the fortified city. Eliko's steps had become labored from blood loss and exhaustion as he emerged from the forest. His body swayed precariously in the morning light as he peered at Abiyakuta. Eliko let out a deep breath that turned into a mewling sob as he sank to his knees. The shaman's shoulders slumped as he gave in to despair. Tunde hopped onto Eliko's shoulder, placing a bony paw on the man's head. The monkey turned his skull toward Abiyakuta, and the creature's hollow eye sockets stared at the long, dark shadow on the ground. Tunde followed the length of the shadow up the city walls to the large wooden cross that stood upon battlements in the morning sun. That was The Feast of Angels by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood.
In here I thought the locusts were bad. Sometimes the worst plagues wear halos.
You convert a village once, you might not survive their second coming.
Our third tale turns inward toward one boy's twisted understanding of nature, order, and purity. What begins as a childhood fascination with insects becomes something much more venomous. This is B is for Boy by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. James Harris felt a satisfying crunch against the soft skin of his palms as he slapped his hands together. He blew the crumpled body of the bee out his son's bedroom windows and slid it shut with the urgency of a man trying to seal the space off from a deadly contagion. Holding his hand up to the daylight, he searched his palms for the pinprick mark of a bee sting. No holes, no redness, no swelling. James had not realized he was holding his breath until he exhaled deeply and let his hands fall to his sides. He hated spring and the swarms of bees that danced among the flowers. It made him feel emasculated to carry on an EpiPen with him everywhere. He swore he could always spot the bemused look on people's faces as their eyes trailed to the back pocket of his jeans, the slim auto-injector filled with epinephrine and the dawning knowledge that the burly 6'5" former high school football star could be felled by his body's allergic reaction to a sting from a bee, a thumbnail-sized insect. Time and again his wife told him it was all his imagination, but he knew the people in town snickered behind his back about his allergy. After his son was born, James brought the child to an allergist who confirmed that the child had inherited his father's allergy to bee stings. James was devastated by the news until the doctor assured him that Jamie's bee allergy scored much lower on the allergen scale. While James had a life-threatening Class 6 bee allergy, Jamie only scored on the high end of Class 3 and was unlikely to manifest anything more than a moderate swelling around the sting. I assure you, these things are very common, the doctor explained to James. Parents do not just pass along their physical characteristics to their children. While it is true that parents can pass along an allergy, physical infirmity, or even mental health issues through their DNA, they also pass along such wonderful things as musical talent, academic aptitude, and artistic abilities. Believe me, James, as Jamie grows, you'll see that you've passed along to him far more than just your allergy. Jamie was now 13, and aside from a few swollen bites over the years, the boy's allergy left him relatively unscathed. James looked around his son's bedroom, the walls covered with posters of Marvel Universe characters, and frowned at the unmade bed. Where had the boy gotten off to? James knew being a long-haul trucker for Stan R's Rolling Rigs didn't leave him much father-son time, but the kid was always up for a ride to Home Depot with his old man. James looked down at his hand as he left the room and noticed a small black filament sticking to his thumb's side. One of the unfortunate bee's legs had dislodged when he crushed it. He wiped his hand clean on his blue jeans with a look of disgust and closed the door behind him. Thursday. Jamie sat in the back seat of his father's Ford pickup truck and tapped on the side of the small cardboard box in his lap. He could hear the creature's exoskeleton rubbing against the cardboard walls as a slender green leg tentatively touched one of the box air holes. That's the first time I've ever seen a praying mantis for sale at Home Depot. Jamie's father's dark eyes glanced up to look at him in the truck's rearview mirror. I've seen him selling ladybugs to eat the aphids, but never a praying mantis. Yeah, it is so cool. Jamie peered through the air hole into the darkened box. He could see the long, slender silhouette of the mantis with its small, triangular head. Hey, if your mom asks, just tell her it eats lettuce and stuff like that. His father smiled and winked at him in the rear view. Let's just keep it between us that it eats bugs. Your mother doesn't need to know that there's a dangerous predator in the house, okay, kiddo? Okay, Dad, Jamie replied without taking his eyes off the box. Jamie reached out and lightly touched the slender, spiked raptorial foreleg that protruded from the air hole, a wicked smile crossing his face. The praying mantis crawled up the stick, the only ornament in its new home in the old Folgers instant coffee jar. Its triangular head rotated upward to study the patch of window screening, covering the jar's opening, and fixed in place by a rubber band, its antennas twitching. Jamie sat at his desk watching the mantis as he quickly thumbed through his dog-eared copy of The Bees in Your Backyard, a guide to North America's bees. It had been a birthday gift from his mother 3 years ago. He remembered how his father rolled his eyes and shook his head as Jamie held up the gleaming white book with the picture of a giant yellow and black honeybee emblazoned across the cover. Bees are amazing and fascinating creatures, his mother had cajoled her husband. It'll be good for him to see that they're more than flying stingers. Bees are just mosquitoes on steroids, or vermin. Monsanto would do us a favor to eradicate both from the earth. James Harris folded his arms across his chest. Well, if there were no bees, there would be no fruits, vegetables, chocolate, coffee, or nuts. Jamie's mother playfully poked at his father, trying to turn his sour mood around. I love it. Jamie's eyes lit up excitedly as he leafed through the book's colorful pages. Jamie did love the book. It was his favorite birthday gift that year. He loved it more than the video games, the comic books, the Marvel action figures, and certainly more than the Thor pajamas from his grandparents. Most 10-year-old boys would have groaned at such an educational gift, but not Jamie. He loved it because it told him everything he needed to know about bees, his arch nemesis. Earlier that summer, Jamie had made 2 important discoveries, both because of his father. When the elder Harris switched the family's cell phone plan from Verizon to T-Mobile, a free subscription to Disney Plus, and its treasure trove of movie properties was an added perk. Jamie sat up in his room watching hours of Marvel superhero movies. He loved the superpowers, the battles, and the eye-popping special effects. But most of all, Jamie loved the villains. Thor, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Captain America, and all the rest of the Avengers seemed boring and lame to the 10-year-old. However, Jamie reveled in the cackling Green Goblin, the scheming plans of Loki, and the raw power of Thanos. He spent his weekly allowance buying comic books at local Walgreens and hanging their posters on his walls. Villains had a plan, cool weapons, and almost always had a score to settle with someone. To Jamie's immense disappointment, every movie ended the same way, with the heroes ganging up on the villain to win the day. Lame, boring. Why shouldn't Loki rule Asgard? Why couldn't Thanos be all-powerful? Jamie's second discovery that summer was that his bee allergy was not a myth. He was sitting cross-legged in the grass waiting for his turn to rotate into the soccer game at the Bite summer day camp his parents had sent him to, when he felt a sharp pain on his upper lip. He frantically swatted at his face, crushing a black and yellow bee across his mouth and cheek. His sudden cry of pain was loud enough to stop the soccer game and bring the camp counselors and children alike running over to where he lay sprawled in the grass. As if sobbing uncontrollably in front of the other campers was not embarrassing enough, his top lip reddened and swelled to the size of a golf ball at the sight of the bee sting. As one of the camp counselors led him to the nurse's office, Jamie could hear the laughing and joking starting to ripple through the assembled children. "I hope you're okay, James B.," called a large redhead boy, followed by a chorus of laughter from the other children. Jamie could hear one of the counselors scolding the boy, but he also heard several children giggling as they referred to him as B-Boy. As Jamie lay on a cot in the nurse's office, waiting for his mother to pick him up, a Ziploc bag filled with pressed ice against his lip, the 2 discoveries gelled in his mind. He envisioned himself as cunning as Loki, as ruthless as the Green Goblin, and as powerful as Thanos as he waged war on his arch nemesis, the bees. After begging his parents not to send him back to summer camp after the embarrassing episode, Jamie began his war of extermination of the bee kingdom. Armed with a rolled-up newspaper, he stalked his mother's flower bed and garden, swatting helpless bees from the air, stomping them underneath his sneakers. Jamie's mother stormed out of the house and took the newspaper from him. She scolded him that none of her tomato plants would fruit if he kept up this behavior. However, when his father came home that night and witnessed the bee carnage on the walkway, he nodded to his son and told him it was a good start. Just be careful not to get himself stung again. Jamie smiled with delight at his father's praise, even though it made his swollen lip ache terribly. "I was just like you as a kid." Jamie's father stared at his son for a long moment, eyeing the child curiously. Later that summer, his mother's birthday gift of The Bees in Your Backyard became the battle plan for his war on bees. The book said dandelions were an essential first food of spring for bees, so Jamie stomped every dandelion he could find. He stalked the woods behind his house with his super soaker, filled with white vinegar from the kitchen, and gleefully sprayed a beehive nestled in their branches of a pine tree after reading that vinegar was lethal to bees. Jamie slipped a six-pack of Pepsi from his father's stash in the sleek black Peterbilt Model 389 semi-truck. He discovered the sodas a week earlier when he spied the corner of a blue soda box peeking out from behind the red and white Make America Great Again flag hanging over the bed in the back of the truck's sleeper cab. When he lifted the flag, Jamie found 3 cases of Pepsi stacked on the over-the-bed shelf alongside a box of Hershey bars, a gallon of Clorox bleach, a bottle of Nailite acetone, and some Walmart dish towels. Jamie poured all 6 sodas into an old white bucket behind the house, after discovering in the book that unattended soda posed a hazard to bees. They would mistake the sugary scent for a blossoming flower, swoop in, and drown. The morning after he set the Pepsi trap, Jamie rushed outside and was delighted to find 5 bees floating in the dark liquid. The trap worked so well that he began to keep track in a black and white notebook of his daily tally, reaching a kill count as high as 9 in a single day before his father discovered the bucket and poured it out, mistaking it for dirty water. After that, Jamie moved his trap into the woods with a fresh 6-pack of Pepsi and enjoyed even higher rates of daily bee mortality. He especially liked when a bee would still be wriggling its legs, trying to free itself from a sugary demise, and he would continuously dunk it under the dark waters with a stick until it floated motionless. By the time he was 13, Jamie had honed himself into a supervillain that had imagined bee mothers had warned their children about at bedtime. When he swatted a bee near the house, he liked to think that these bee superheroes sent to defeat him, but failed and died. Jamie still made his Pepsi traps, which he named Sweet Death. He also added new variants to his arsenal, including one that lured in specifically yellow jackets with meat and drowned them in soapy water that he called Meat Death. When he spotted the boxes of praying mantises by the checkout counter at Home Depot, a plan that would make Loki proud caressed the corners of his mind. Now he could feel the mantis' bulbous eyes staring at him from within the jar as he turned the book's pages. Jamie found what he sought with a triumphant laugh and tapped the picture on the page. The image took up a full half-page of the book, showing a large green praying mantis clutching a bee in its raptorial forelegs. Jamie looked from the picture to the mantis in the jar, a malicious smile crossing his face. The arch-villain now had a monster to unleash upon the bees. Friday. For most of the day at school, Jamie sat thinking about how to employ the mantis that weekend. Last weekend, he spotted a bee nest forming on an oak tree in the woods. The worker bees were still building the honeycomb structure, and he fantasized about the mantis tearing its way through the thin walls of the nest to get at the plump queen. The nascent hive, nestled in the crook where a low-hanging branch met the old oak's trunk, ideally located for the morning sun to heat the nest and the shade to keep it from overheating in the afternoon. Jamie had contemplated taking it out with the vinegar and the super soaker on the spot, but decided to let the worker bees toil away for another week. It read that it took up to 14 days for a new nest to become fully populated, so he felt another week would make it ripe for conquest. He envisioned the mantis descending upon the hive like an insectoid Godzilla, emerging from the waters of Tokyo Bay to lay waste to the city. Jamie mulled over the problem of the mantis in his mind. The bees provided an easy and ample food source, but the mantis had wings and could fly off once released. He thought about clipping the mantis' wings with a nail clipper, but in the end, he decided to tie kite string around the insect and affix the other end to the ground. Just enough line to reach the hive, so the mantis would have to go for the bees to feed. Jamie supposed the string would inhibit the mantis from successfully evading a crow that saw the long insect as a quick and satisfying meal. However, if Loki or the Green Goblin never scrapped the plan because of the risks, then neither would he. So all day at school, Jamie occupied his thoughts with his self-described cunning plan. He had a few friends at school, more acquaintances than friends, just some other boys he sat with at lunch and chatted with about movies, video games, and school gossip. However, he never shared his plans with them. School rarely held Jamie's attention for long, though his grades were consistently above average, and this day was the same. The only exception was Mr. Criaris' sociology class, which focused on this afternoon's discussion of the phenomenon of serial killers in society. On most days, Mr. Criaris seemed as bored by discussions of social change and the impact of human behavior on society as the rest of the class. However, the ordinarily sedate teacher seemed electrified by the recent storm of media coverage of the hunt for the 66 Strangler, a serial killer responsible for the murder of at least 32 homeless people along a stretch of highway between Chicago, Illinois and Santa Monica, California. Serial killers often start their careers by torturing or killing small animals. The rail-thin teacher tapped a cigarette-stained finger on the keyboard of the laptop, and a PowerPoint projected onto the screen at the front of the darkened classroom and toggled through a series of grim-faced mugshots. They chose animals because they were weak and vulnerable, Mr. Criaris continued, as a picture of a handsome, smiling, dark-haired man appeared on the screen. Ted Bundy was known to derive pleasure from torturing cats and dogs. I suspect that once the 66th Strangler is apprehended, similar details will emerge about him. Or her. Seo Hyun raised her hand and added from the back of the room. Or her. Mr. Criaris nodded and smiled at the correction, apparently thrilled with the rare class participation in a lesson. Jamie was disappointed his teacher arrived at such a simplistic solution. He'd spent hours dissecting live bees, watching them slowly suffocate in enclosed jars, starve on glue traps, or react when sprayed with various chemicals. While Jamie admittedly enjoyed it, he didn't think it was fair play to say he did it for pleasure. He did this to hone his knowledge of his foe. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. That was straight out of the mouth of the Chinese tactician Sun Tzu from the 6th century B.C. Jamie imagined it was the same for serial killers. They did these things to increase their understanding, not for pleasure. Whatever his motivation, the 66th Strangler was abducting and killing homeless people, so Jamie thought it would be logical for the killer to start with animals to perfect his craft and lessen the chance of making a mistake that could get them caught. Jamie attributed this to a need for more critical thinking to reverse the dumbing down of people that started with fairy tales and continued in every book, movie, and television show. The bad guys were cruel and evil, and the good guys were pure and innocent. Many people were troubled by the growth of homelessness in America. He had heard his father go on endlessly about the topic. Jamie felt he was one of the few people cerebral enough to consider that, whether misguided or not, the 66th Strangler was one of the few people doing something about the growing homelessness, the epidemic. However, society ascribed serial killers as the bad guys, just like in the movies, so their only conceivable motivation was to do evil. Jamie imagined raising his hand and pointing out this flaw in society, and since this was a sociology class, was not that what they should be discussing? He'd rest his case with the profound statement, what if Loki wanted to rule Asgard because he thought Odin was doing a pretty crappy job of it, and Thor only stopped him so he could look like a hero and bang a harem of Valkyries? History's written by the victors, after all. Jamie envisioned the class staring at him with an awestruck face, and Mr. Criaris nodding thoughtfully at his revelation and keen observation. It occurred to Jamie that serial killers were no different than supervillains, and he imagined a classroom full of bees looking at his grinning picture on a screen and shrinking back in terror. The thought made him smile. A crumpled-up ball bounced off the side of his face and landed on his desk, jolting him from his daydream. "What are you smiling about, Jamie?" A blonde-haired kid with a buzz cut smirked at him from the row next of the desks. "You gay for Ted Bundy?" Jamie glanced over at Scott McNulty, the boy who had been there that day on the soccer field when he got his bee sting and was single-handedly responsible for spreading his nickname around the school. Behind Scott, Jenna Wilson, a gangly, blonde girl with large blue eyes, snickered and laughed. "Freako weirdo," the voice of T.J. Edwards, a new student whose family moved to town from Sierra Leone only a few weeks ago, whispered in a thick West African accent. Jamie swatted the ball of paper from his desk and stared at the projection screen at the front of the room. As Mr. Criaris droned on, his smile was gone. He imagined what it would be like to have Scott McNulty suffocating in one of his jars, eyes bulging and face reddening as he gasped for air. Jamie pictured Jenna Wilson struggling to stay afloat in a life-size version of Sweet Death, blonde hair matted to her face as her limbs desperately sought purchase. He glanced sidelong at Scott and Jenna, who continued to whisper and snicker. How easy it would be to become their supervillain. The comic book of his origin story would start on that soccer field with their mocking laughter. It would cover the years of name-calling and shoves in the hall, juxtaposed with Jamie mastering the ways of revenge, and end with these two teenage Ken and Barbies covered in dirt out in the woods. Maybe, one day. Saturday. Jamie carefully cradled the jar containing the mantis as he walked up the dirt path from the subdivision into the woods. Ultimately, tying the kite string around the mantis proved easier than he expected. The insect proved very docile as he held it in his hand and affixed the line around its upper body, just below its raptorial forelegs, to not interfere with the mantis' ability to extend its wings. He winced when he tied the string tight and heard a subtle crack in the insect's exoskeleton. However, the mantis still seemed to function normally. Kelly Burns, a small, dark-haired girl in a flowery pink dress, casually swung an old blonde ragdoll as she exited the woods in front of Jamie. Her eyes immediately went to the jar in his hand, and he reflectively covered it. "What's that, Jamie?" The 10-year-old girl craned her neck to glimpse the jar. "That's nothing." Jamie covered it with his hand as he walked past her. "Oh, come on, Jamie, let me see it." Disappointment crossed her young face, then it lit up with joy as an idea struck her mind. "I can take you to something cool in the woods if you show me." "Oh, what is it?" Jamie was annoyed at how interested his voice sounded. A broad smile crossed Kelly's face. "You show me the jar first." "Fine." Jamie moved his hand and Kelly peered at the jar. He saw the questioning look on her face. "It's a praying mantis. They eat other bugs." "Why is a string tied to it?" She tapped on the glass jar and the insect turned its triangular head to study her. "So it doesn't fly away." Jamie tried to mimic his father's look when telling his son something he thought was obvious. The young girl contemplated his words momentarily and nodded, apparently content with the answer. "So, what is it you want to show me?" Jamie covered the jar back up with his hand. "Come on, I'll show you." Kelly turned back toward the woods. "It's so cool." Jimmy followed her into the woods, watching her doll's blonde, yarn-like hair bob up and down with each step. Walking behind her, he was reminded of sitting on the couch and watching the movie My Girl with his mother one afternoon. In the film, a young boy, played by a spectacled Macaulay Culkin, stumbled across a bee's nest while walking in the woods and was repeatedly stung, until he ultimately died of anaphylactic shock. Jimmy imagined bringing Kelly to the old oak tree and throwing her little doll over the branch with the beehive and then striking the nest with a thrown rock when she went to retrieve it. If the bees stung her repeatedly and she died, the whole town would recognize the value of his bee-killing expertise. However, he quickly dismissed the notion, after surmising that Kelly would likely survive the bee encounter since she didn't have a bee allergy that he knew of, and would tell her parents and get him in trouble. "There it is." Kelly turned to him, beaming as she pointed at a small patch of grass between two trees a few feet in front of the dirt path. "Isn't it cool?" And Jamie squinted his eyes, staring at the area between the trees, but saw nothing of note. He looked at her questioningly, and she rolled her eyes and threw her arms up in the air in exasperation. "Come on!" She walked off the path toward the two trees and glanced down at the doll. "I would never have found it. Mrs. Beasley told me where to look." "Who's Mrs. Beasley?" Jamie glanced down at the jar to check on the mantis, and the insect seemed unfazed by the jostling as its spiky legs clung to the branch inside. "Mrs. Beasley?" Kelly held the doll out. "She was my grandmother. She tells me all kinds of things." Jamie stared at the cloth doll. The eyes, nose, and mouth were sewn from faded black string, and she wore an equally faded red and white checkered dress. The graying, once white cloth of her arms and legs ended in nondescript round ends, without any discernible hands or feet. "Your grandmother tells you things." "No, silly." Kelly pursed her lips in annoyance. "Mrs. Beasley tells me things. Here it is, see?" She pointed down to the patch of grass between the trees. Jamie stared at a perfect circle 3 feet wide, ringed by a perimeter of white mushrooms with plump round caps atop thick stems. The grass inside the ring was even darker, a shade of green, than the grass outside. "Very cool." Jamie eyed the circle. "Something must have died between the trees. I bet it was a raccoon or maybe a fox." "No." The look of exasperation had returned to Kelly's young face. "It's a fairy ring. Mrs. Beasley told me the forest spirits put the mushrooms there so they had a place to sit after they got tired of dancing inside the circle." "I don't think Mrs. Beasley knows what she's talking about." Jamie reached down to pluck one of the mushrooms. "I'm pretty sure these grow on dead things." "Don't do that!" Kelly's voice was shrill and panicked as she grabbed his hand. When he looked at her, the young girl's eyes were wide and full of fear. She spoke in a low, hushed tone. "You never mess with a fairy ring. It's a sacred place. If you disturb it, you'll anger the forest spirits." "I'm sick of these baby games." Jamie yanked his hand out of her grasp. "I have more important things to do." Jamie turned and left her standing there as he headed back toward the path and the old oak tree. He looked back to ensure she was not following him and saw that she was still there, looking down at the ring of mushrooms. However, how she held the old doll made it appear that the doll's faded black eyes were watching him over her shoulder as he walked away. Jimmy had perfectly judged the distance between the beehive and the heavy branch on the ground. He was sure of it. He praised himself for his ingenuity. There was just enough kite string for the mantis to reach the bee's nest, and with the other end tied to the branch, the insect would have no choice but to attack the hive. Behind him, the audible buzz of the bees filled the air with a steady thrumming, like an idling motor. There was a lot more activity around the nest than he expected. The bees seemed agitated by his presence close to the oak tree, and Jamie smiled as he took that as a clear sign the queen was inside. He should have kept an eye on the beehive as he tied the kite string, but he was too busy picturing the mantis grasping the queen in its spiked forelegs. The pain in the back of his neck had been as sharp as it was sudden. He lost his balance and fell backward as he swatted the bee and felt its body crunch against the skin just above his collar. His foot had toppled over the jar, and he watched the mantis fly off into the sky. Jamie's eyes widened in horror as the loose end of the string fluttered behind the mantis as the insect climbed toward the tree's upper branches. He leaped and tried to catch the kite string, but his fingers only grasped the air as the mantis flew out of reach. He cursed as he realized the bee had stung him before he could tie the end of the line to the fallen branch. He paced angrily around the clearing, eyes fixed upon the length of string that dangled down from the mantis perch high up in the tree. The mantis would come down, and when it did, Jamie would grab the line and secure it to the branch. He'd wait all afternoon if necessary. However, the number of bees flying around the hive steadily increased, and Jamie swatted at them to keep them away as he backed further and further out of the clearing. Anger and frustration surged through Jamie's body at his foiled plan, stoked further by the burning pain of the bee sting on his neck. A bee landed on his pants leg, and only the thickness of his jeans saved him from another sting as he smashed the bug with his hand. It was only a matter of time before another one of the angry insects landed a lucky sting, but another idea returned as he turned from the clearing and headed back down the path. He'd throw Kelly and her ugly doll into the clearing. With this many bees as agitated as they were, she might be stung hundreds of times. He knew enough bee stings could be fatal even with someone who doesn't have an allergy. It takes approximately 9 stings per pound of a person's weight for bee venom to be fatal. Jamie's thoughts raced as he stalked down the path. As small and skinny as Kelly was, this could work. He'd throw her back in again if she managed to leave the clearing. As long as no one heard her scream, Jimmy felt confident she'd be stung enough times to die. Then it would be open season on bees. He smiled at the plan. The smile quickly faded from Jimmy's face as the path wound around the bend, and he saw the 2 trees with their odd patch of grass. Kelly was gone. He searched further up the trail and in the woods, but the child was nowhere to be found. Jamie screamed in frustration. Everything had gone wrong. Then his eyes glanced down to the ring of mushrooms that circled the grass between the trees. A precious fairy ring. Jamie imitated the girl's voice as a wicked smile crossed his lips. He raised one foot, brought it down on the first mushroom, and reveled in the squishing feeling of the fungus beneath his sneaker. Jamie squashed another, then another, stomping his feet up and down on the mushroom until it appeared like he was dancing wildly on a little circle of mushrooms. He roared with laughter as he crushed the mushrooms, and in his madness, Jimmy thought he detected an answering howl of wind among the trees. Sweat poured from his brow and down his back when he finished. Jamie laughed and smiled from ear to ear as he surveyed the devastation he'd wrought on the circle of mushrooms. Not a single stem stood. All that remained of Kelly's fairy ring were chunky smears of white and brown amidst the dark green grass. That felt good. Jamie panted from the exertion. That felt very good. The strong, cold wind blew through the woods, and the branches of the 2 trees beside the defiled fairy ring creaked dangerously. Jamie breathed deeply, trying to fill his lungs as the adrenaline of his chaotic dance of destruction among the mushrooms ebbed. However, the air stung his lungs, and his breath became a hacking cough that left his mouth tasting bitter and ashy. Jamie tried spitting several times to get the taste from his mouth, but it did nothing to alleviate the acrid flavor in his tongue. His mouth tasted like he'd been gnawing on a charred piece of wood. He sniffed the air, but it smelled fresh and clean with no hint of smoke or fire. The bee sting on his neck began to throb, and he reflexively raised a hand to the inflamed area. He grimaced and frowned at the feel of the golf ball-sized lump forming behind his head. Spitting another bitter-tasting wad of saliva under the ground, Jamie started toward his house to get some hydrocortisone cream for the sting and maybe grab another of his father's Pepsi sodas to wash the terrible taste from his mouth. Jamie lay in his bed, glowering at the ceiling. He slid his hand behind his head and poked the swollen bee bite on his neck. The skin was tender to the touch, but Jimmy pressed on it until the pain almost brought tears through his eyes. He gritted his teeth at the pain, letting it feed his anger. Stupid! Jimmy closed his hand into a fist so hard, his fingernails dug into his palm. Stupid, stupid mistake. The mantis was gone and the bees had won the day. The thought infuriated him. Tomorrow he'd fill his super soaker with lighter fluid, douse the nest, and roast the queen bee inside. The idea made him smile. He envisioned the queen hearing the popping sound of the worker bees exploding as they were immolated by the flames eating their way through the hive walls to a resting place. Jamie laughed out loud, a malicious sound filled with scorn, as he pictured Kelly's distraught cries at finding her fairy ring destroyed. Mrs. Beasley didn't tell you about that, eh? His laugh turned into a cough, and he winced at the return of the acrid taste in his mouth. It subsided some since he got home, but he couldn't wholly get the bitter taste from his mouth. Even the pizza he had for dinner tasted ashy. He eyed the half-full cup of Coca-Cola, his mother's beverage of choice, on his nightstand, but dismissed the thought of taking a sip when he saw that dark liquid had gone flat. To make matters worse, his father caught him sneaking into the sleeper cab of the Peterbilt to grab a Pepsi and was furious. His father grabbed Jimmy's arm so hard that he cried out in pain as he pulled him out of the truck's cab. Jimmy had gotten in trouble with his father before, but never saw his father's face so red and contorted with anger. "This truck is my space." Spittle flew from his father's mouth as he screamed. "You have a whole goddamn house and yard to play in, but you keep your ass out of my truck. Do you understand me?" Jamie almost wet his pants as his father shouted the last 4 words just inches from his face, and all he could do was nod in response. He loved his father, at least he thought he did. However, Jamie often fantasized about his father becoming the 66 Strangler's next victim, his dark eyes bulging from his blue face as the killer choked him. He pictured being interviewed by all the news outlets about the loss of his father, and the sympathetic look on CNN's Aaron Burnett's face as he told her about the GoFundMe page he'd created. Jamie bet he could get at least $500,000, maybe even more. The back of his neck throbbed, and Jamie's countenance darkened as he imagined Scotty McNulty approaching him in a hallway and pressing the bee sting like a button as the other kids laughed. If the 66 Strangler got his dad, he might take the Peterbilt and drive it straight through the schoolyard. He drifted to sleep, imagining the terror on their faces as the big, black semi-truck barreled through the schoolyard, thumping their bodies against the grill and crunching their bones under the giant wheels. Sunday. Jamie awoke pleased to find the throbbing in his neck and the bitter taste in his mouth gone. He looked up at a poster of Loki above his head and blinked. A poster of Loki, played by actor Tom Hiddleston, with his long, black hair, shining armor, and red flowing cape, staring down at Asgard, looked incredibly huge. It looked billboard-sized, and he noticed Loki's red cape was now a dull black. He looked around the room, and everything seemed to have grown impossibly large overnight. Jamie tried to rub the sleep from his eyes and froze. His arm looked long and dark, with long straight hairs sticking straight out, and narrowing to a skinny point that ended in a claw. Jamie's stomach sank, not just a claw, but a thin tarsal claw bees used to grip and taste. He raised his other arm and saw a matching appendage. Jimmy's head swam as he looked down at his body, the segmented body of a bee. 6 legs protruded from the round middle segment of a body covered in yellow and black hair. He saw the 4 pairs of wax-producing glands in his lower abdomen section, and then he leaned further forward and groaned. No stinger. That meant this was the body of a common drone bee, not even a worker. This is the lamest dream ever. Jimmy shook his head and ran one tarsal claw over the pointed mandible of his mouth. Yep, definitely a drone bee. Jimmy rolled over and stood on his 6 legs, surveying the vast field of white that it took him a moment to realize was his pillow. He flexed the muscles in his back and was pleased to feel his wings flap in response. Well, if I can't sting someone in my dream, I might as well enjoy a little flying. Jamie took a running leap off the pillow. The cold fear of fear surged through his body as he plummeted a cavernous drop from his pillow to the bedroom floor. He worked his back muscles feverishly, trying to get his fluttering wings to engage. Jamie's bee body had fallen half the distance to the floor before the wings proved some lift, slowing his descent and then soaring up into the sky. The initial sensation of flying left him feeling dizzy and nauseous as his eyes adjusted to the roller coaster view of his room, swooning before him. However, Jamie was quickly buzzing around the room with skill in no time. Posters and furniture zoomed past his eyes, and he reveled at the ability to land on a wall and upside down on the ceiling. His antenna twitched, and he felt a surge of pheromones released within his body as he sensed nectar nearby. The sensation he took for a bee's version of hunger filled his body, and he swooped down from the ceiling toward the source of the nectar. Jamie felt the air brush against the hair on his body as his antenna guided him toward the nectar. His mind struggled to process the messages that the bee's antenna collected and sent to his brain as the room flew by in a rush. His flight suddenly stopped as he splashed into a dark, viscous liquid. The bee's 6 legs moved frantically as its wings dampened. Jamie felt panic rise as he struggled to keep the dark sea from rushing into his mouth. The message his antenna sent to his brain seemed to be misfiring in confusion or overload. He was unsure. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" The words echoed in his mind like a mantra as he tried to rouse himself from this nightmare. Jamie bumped into a transparent wall and his eyes caught sight of a man with long, dark hair staring down at him. He struggled with recognition momentarily and then realized it was the Loki poster on the wall. His legs waddled below him, trying to keep the insect body afloat. With growing horror, Jamie realized that his antenna had guided him into the half-drunk glass of Coca-Cola by his bedside. The thought almost made him laugh, trapped in a sweet death trap. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" The legs desperately tread water and move the little body around the glass like a boat in a small lake. Every time Jamie saw the scowling face of Loki, he knew he had circumnavigated the cup again. His attempts to move his wings again proved futile as the dark, sticky liquid held them close to his body. Inexplicably, the legs on the right side of his body seemed to be tiring faster than those on the left. So he began to list to one side and struggled to keep his mouth from submerging. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" Something splashed in the water to his left, and Jamie struggled to turn the bee's body to look. Had the bee had eyelids, they would have opened wide in surprise at the thick white rope that descended into the glass. With the last bit of energy he could muster, Jamie willed the 6 paddling legs to propel them through the liquid to the rope. When he reached it, he sank his tarsal claws into the soft white rope and lay still. His energy wholly expanded. Jimmy had no idea how he'd muster the strength to climb the rope to escape the glass of soda. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" His voice screamed inside his head. "I don't like this anymore." Then Jamie heard another voice in his head. A girl's voice that he somehow knew was that of the doll, Mrs. Beasley. It spoke to him in a sing-song tune. "You never mess with the fairy ring. It's a sacred place. If you disturb it, you'll anchor the forest spirits." The voice trailed off in laughter that chilled his soul. Suddenly, Jimmy's bee body hoisted high out of the water and into the air as the rope took flight. The rope yanked his small body so severely that he feared his tarsal claws would rip from its limbs. He fluttered chaotically through the air as the line bucked and swayed. The rope dipped suddenly downward, and he saw bright daylight streaming through his open bedroom window. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up!" Jimmy's voice whimpered inside his head. The rope stuck the white wooden windowsill, and Jimmy's body came to a crashing stop. He felt two of the tarsal claws on his left side separate from its body, and one of his wings bent with a loud crack. Jamie freed his remaining tarsal claws from the rope, and he lay on his side trying to assess the damage to his body. Remarkably, he felt no pain from the damaged limbs. However, he was sure the wing was broken. A cool wind blew in from the window, and he felt his antennas twitch. Maybe sunlight would rouse him from the dream, remind his mind that it was time to wake up. Then the doll's words echoed in his head, and he wondered, for the first time, could this be real? Some punishment from the forest for his transgression against it? Jamie refused to believe this could really be happening to him. He pushed his body forward toward the sunlight. It was time to wake up. A long, dark shadow fell across his body, and he turned his head to find the source. He stared up into the triangular head of the mantis, his raptorial claws rubbing together in a gesture that reminded him of a man rubbing his hands together before a big meal. Jamie's eyes trailed down the long green body of the mantis to the string that remained tied around its waist. Jamie could have laughed if he was not so tired and scared. The loose end of the kite rope had saved him from the soda. Was it a coincidence, or did the mantis intentionally pull him from the drink? He didn't know, but suspected it was the latter. The creature moved slowly toward him, and something about the look in the insectoid's eyes told Jamie that the mantis knew he was more than a common drone bee. Jamie knew what came next: the grasping raptorial claws, dismemberment and decapitation. He hoped the mantis started with decapitation so that this nightmare could end. Jamie hoped he would wake up. He wasn't so sure anymore. The mantis took another step forward, and Jamie thought it was toying with him, prolonging the anticipation of the kill. "I should have left you to die in that box at Home Depot," Jamie thought as the mantis took another step. "You'd be dead and discarded in the dumpster by now." The mantis stopped and swiveled its head toward the open window as a shadow blocked the daylight. Jamie watched incredulously as a large black crow swooped down onto the ledge, the bird's weight cracking the mantis' exoskeleton as it landed on the giant insect. The bird stared at the broken body of the bee curiously with jet-black eyes, cocking its head quizzically. Then almost as quickly as it landed, the crow was flying off again, the white line affixed to the mantis' body fluttering after it. Jamie lay there in the sunlight, broken and exhausted. After a time, he tried his wings and found that even with a damaged wing, he could manage a short burst of flight, though where he would go and what he would do was a mystery to him. He heard a voice calling his name in the distance and realized it was his father, coming down the hall to his room. Hope sprang into the darkness of Jamie's mind as he watched his father enter the room. His father was looking for him. Jamie tried to call out, but no sound emanated from his bee mouth. A plan formed in Jamie's mind. He could spell something out like that spider in Charlotte's Web. Jamie just needed to get his father's attention. As his father passed by the window, Jamie mustered all his strength into his flailing wings and leaped into the air. James Harris felt a satisfying crunch against the soft skin of his palms as he slapped his hands together. He blew the crumpled body of the bee out his son's bedroom windows and slid it shut with the urgency of a man trying to seal the space off from a deadly contagion. Holding his hand up to the daylight, he searched his palms for the pinprick mark of a bee sting. No holes, no redness, no swelling. Police searching for missing California boy make grim discovery. By Anna Levinson, CNN, updated 9:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Thursday, January 12, 2023. Police searching for Jamie Harris, who disappeared from his home last Sunday, made a gruesome discovery in the sleeper cab of a semi-truck parked on the family property. Blood evidence recovered from the 2020 Peterbilt Model 389 semi-truck has been linked to two victims of the 66 Strangler. Police executing a search warrant of the premises also recovered bleach and acetone, key ingredients in homemade chloroform, from the vehicle. Police Chief Andrew Platt also revealed that specific food and drink were located in the vehicle that matched previous undisclosed evidence discovered in the stomach contents of all 66 Strangler victims. Police took James Harris, the owner of the vehicle and father of the missing boy, into custody late last night on suspicion of murder. That was B is for Boy by Jack Finn, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry.
If you ever needed a reason to fear the kid with the insect collection, there it is.
Here I thought the bees were the ones doing the stinging.
If you enjoyed tonight's journey through haunted creeds, sacrificial altars, and vengeful apparitions, you're in luck. There's more waiting for you in the patrons area. Extended ad-free episodes featuring bonus tales and exclusive horrors you won't hear anywhere else.
It's just $7.99 a month, or save big with the yearly plan, and it gives you full access to every story, every scream without a single commercial break. You'll be supporting indie horror and making sure the doors to the dark stay open.
To join, just head to simplyscarypodcast.com and click the Patrons tab, or go straight to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to become a member. Come closer to the stories, if you dare.
From all of us here at Chilling Entertainment, thank you for your support.
If tonight's episode proved anything, it's that not all faith leads to light. A twisted congregation beneath a seaside town. A missionary's return to the site of his greatest sin. A boy who learned too early that purity stings. A bedtime sanctuary turned battleground. And a jungle relic that pulses with something older than God.
Tonight was a reminder that belief, misplaced or misunderstood, can turn homes into hunting grounds, sanctuaries into shrines of sacrifice, and explorers into offerings. The horror doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it wears robes, speaks in tongues, and waits for you to kneel.
If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our parent channel, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights on YouTube, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new nightmare.
And if your craving for darkness goes even deeper, dive into the full first season of Otis Jiry's Tales from Duskwood, where I bring you eerie encounters drawn from the forgotten corners of the world. You'll find it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you get your fix of fear.
We also want to hear from you. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and let us know which story haunted you tonight, or which one made you question what's lurking in your own reflection.
And a special thanks to author Jack Finn for tonight's entire descent into dread. His upcoming collection, They Come When You Sleep, 16 Tales of Horror and the Supernatural, arrives August 29th. Pre-order it now and keep one eye open.
Because the next time someone invites you to join, to kneel, to follow,
remember, not every faith offers redemption. Some just want a little piece of you.
Sleep well, listeners.
If you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?